I was standing in the ballroom of our 40th anniversary, my ivory dress trembling against my skin as the truth unfolded before me. Thomas walked onto the stage, but not to take my hand. He held the hand of a woman I had never seen, elegant and sharp-eyed, her smile slicing through the room. Behind them stood 3 grown children, each carrying echoes of his face. "I want to introduce my real family," he announced, and the guests turned toward me as if I were an intruder at my own celebration. No one reached for me. No one spoke my name. The small box I carried tapped against my palm, whispering that the end had finally come. They guided me out of the front row with polite smiles that felt more like firm hands, placing Evelyn, the woman who had taken my place, where I was meant to sit. A few guests glanced at me, their faces mixing pity and curiosity, but not a single one stepped forward. Evelyn leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her voice dripping sweetness that stung. "You should accept the truth," she murmured. "He's had a real family for over 20 years. Her 3 grown children stared at me as if I had wandered into a celebration that didn't belong to me. Thomas lifted the microphone again, making sure every corner of the ballroom heard him. "I've endured this marriage long enough. Tonight, I'll announce the rightful changes to my estate." Murmurs rose instantly. Phones tilted toward us, recording the spectacle. Someone behind me whispered, loud enough to pierce the air. If that were me, I'd die of shame. The words hit harder than I expected. My chest tightened, a crack spreading through me like thin ice breaking under weight. Still, I stood tall. I tightened my grip on the box, the one thing he never managed to take from me. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I simply watched them. Each gesture, each smirk, each calculated line. I had been waiting far longer than they realized. I slipped out of the ballroom before the fireworks for our 40th anniversary lit the sky. My footsteps echoed softly along the long hotel corridor, the warm amber lights casting a faint glow on the box pressed against my chest. A couple of relatives hurried after me. "Where are you going?" "Let it go. Men are just men," one said, touching my arm gently. I smiled. A gentle, tired smile that made them think I was fragile. I kept walking. Outside, in the quiet parking lot, I sat in the back seat of my car and finally let myself breathe. My fingers lifted the lid of the box, revealing the edges of thick documents, a small memory card, and an old letter whose paper had begun to yellow. A cold breeze slipped through the cracked window, yet calm settled over me like a blanket. For the first time in 4 decades, I wasn't afraid. I knew I was finally ready to tell the whole story on my own terms. My name is Marianne, and I am 62 years old. I fell in love with Thomas when we were both young and broke, sharing a cramped room in an old apartment block where dreams were bigger than our circumstances. Back then, I thought he was the most honest man I had ever known. We built everything from nothing. I worked 2 jobs to help him open his first small company, balancing bookkeeping at night and caring for his aging mother during the day. I cooked, cleaned, raised our son, kept every quiet corner of our life together running the way he liked it. He used to take my hands in his and whisper, "You're the backbone of everything, Marianne," and for nearly 40 years, I believed him without question. But little by little, he began to change. He came home late, smelling of cologne he never wore for me. His phone suddenly had a password. At dinner, he would smile down at messages that made his eyes sparkle in a way I hadn't seen in years. When I asked gently, "Is there someone else?" he scoffed and snapped, "You're imagining things." "It's your age." That word age cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a push into the shadows, a way of telling me I was no longer worth honesty. I stayed silent because I thought family was worth the sacrifice. But the truth I uncovered later taught me a harsher lesson when you give everything to the wrong person. You don't become valued, you become prey. 3 months before the anniversary, I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. The message was brief, almost clinical. requesting that I appear to update several documents related to marital assets. My stomach tightened. We had no pending plans, no upcoming transactions. When I showed Thomas the letter, he barely looked up from his phone. "I have a lot of assets in my name," he said flatly. "It's just legal housekeeping." But there was something in his tone and eagerness to end the conversation that made my skin prickle. Still, I went to the appointment, telling myself I was overthinking. At the firm, a young attorney handed me a thick stack of documents. Page after page required my signature, but what stopped my breath was a section titled Contingent Beneficiaries, listing 3 names I'd never heard in 40 years of marriage. I stared at the attorney and asked quietly, "Who are these people?" He hesitated, shifting in his chair. "I'm only following your husband's instructions." My hands began to tremble. I placed the pen down and forced a small smile. "I'll need time to review these," I said, even though the room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. As I walked out of the building, each step felt heavier than the last. I understood, with a clarity that hollowed me out, that Thomas wasn't merely hiding something. He was preparing a future where I no longer existed beside him. That night, after pacing the living room for almost an hour, I dialed a number I never imagined I would use again, my personal attorney, the one I had trusted long before Thomas learned how to lie to me. I drove to Elijah's house the next morning, the sky still dim with the last traces of dawn. His porch light was on, as if he had been expecting me. Elijah had always carried an air of quiet wisdom, an old friend of my late father, a man who had seen too many truths life tried to hide. When he opened the door, his face softened the moment he saw me clutching the box against my chest. "Marianne," he said gently, "it's been a long time." I felt something inside me loosen, the way a child might feel when finally reaching home after getting lost. He ushered me in, made tea, and waited until my breathing steadied before asking, "Tell me everything." I laid out the documents from the law firm, the names of the strange beneficiaries, and the vague explanations Thomas had offered. Elijah listened without interruption, his brow tightening with each page he reviewed. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm but heavy. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "You want to know the entire truth? For the first time in years." I didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Elijah, I'm done pretending everything is fine." He nodded, then opened his old leather briefcase and pulled out a laptop and a few folders. "I checked the public records before you arrived," he said. "Something didn't sit right with that letter you sent me last night." He pulled up a list of transactions, each one labeled with names I recognized only from the documents at the law firm. "These recurring payments," he explained, pointing to lines of deposits. "They go to a woman named Evelyn Hart." My heart froze. "Evelyn," I repeated, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. Elijah continued, "Not just that, there are school payments, health insurance, and travel expenses linked to 3 individuals with her surname, all funded through Thomas's business accounts. Marianne, this isn't a simple affair." A cold numbness spread through my arms, but Elijah kept speaking with the steady patience of someone who had delivered many painful truths. "Marianne, these expenses didn't start recently. They go back almost 2 decades. He tapped the screen softly. "This pattern consists in amounts, regular intervals. Same recipient usually means long-term support, not casual dishonesty." My voice trembled before I could stop it. "So he's been funding them all this time?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, and based on these documents, I believe those 3 individuals are his children." For a moment, the room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling years of devotion collapsing like a weakened bridge. Elijah rose and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Marianne, breathe. None of this is your fault." I closed my eyes, letting the truth sink in slowly, painfully, but undeniably. A strange calm washed over me, not because it hurt less, but because the fog I had lived in for years was finally lifting. I opened my eyes again. "What do I do now?" Elijah sat back down, pulling a notepad toward us. "First, you stay quiet," he said firmly. "You cannot let Thomas know you've discovered this. People who juggle 2 families become unpredictable when cornered." I nodded. I can stay quiet. I've done that my whole life. He gave a sympathetic half smile. Yes, but this time, silence isn't submission, it's strategy. For the next hour, he walked me through everything I needed to protect myself, how to document irregularities without raising suspicion, how to record conversations legally, how to back up files to a separate encrypted device, how to separate my finances from Thomas's before he attempted to take control. Each instruction felt like a brick placed under my feet, lifting me out of the pit I'd been pushed into. And Marianne, he added gently, you must prepare yourself emotionally. 2. This next part will change everything. I met his eyes. I'm ready. I have to be. Elijah asked me to bring the box I had carried from the ballroom. I placed it on the table between us, suddenly aware of how heavy it felt, not in weight, but in meaning. He opened it carefully, like a man dismantling a bomb. Inside were items I had never truly examined. Pieces of Thomas's life I had ignored out of trust or fear. Receipts tucked between envelopes, contracts without my signature, a flash drive with no label, and at the very bottom, sealed in a plastic sleeve, a folded document with Thomas's handwriting on the cover. Elijah slid it out, smoothing the creases. His eyes narrowed. This looks like a revised will. My throat tightened. A will? Yes, he confirmed. And from the date, it was updated recently within the past 3 months. He read silently for a long moment, then took a deep breath. Marianne, this will transfers the majority of your marital assets to Evelyn and her children. It gives you only a small monthly allowance, contingent on you residing in a supervised care facility. I felt the floor fall away beneath me. He wants to put me in a nursing home, I whispered. Elijah nodded sadly. He was building a case that you're becoming forgetful and emotionally unstable, with enough fabricated reports. He could have convinced a judge. A deep, burning ache filled my chest. Anger, betrayal, humiliation, but beneath it all, something else flickered resolve. Elijah gently closed the folder and looked at me with a steady, unwavering gaze. Marianne, listen to me. You're not powerless. You have the documents. You have the truth. And you have time to act before he makes his next move. I met his eyes, feeling an unfamiliar strength rising inside me. Then teach me everything. Elijah, I won't let him erase me. He smiled, not out of comfort, but out of respect. Good. Because some battles, he said softly, aren't won with shouting. They're won with paperwork. That night, back in Thomas's study, I opened a locked drawer he thought I never noticed, and there it was, an entire folder labeled Family B, along with the original draft of the will he had hoped I'd never see. The morning after my meeting with Elijah, I drove to his house again with a notebook, a flash drive, and the steady determination of someone who no longer wished to be deceived. Elijah welcomed me inside, motioning toward the kitchen table where he had already laid out several folders. We're going to build this step by step, he said. 3 layers of protection, 3 layers of truth. I took a seat, feeling a strange but comforting shift inside me, like stepping into a version of myself I had forgotten existed. Tell me where to begin, I said. He tapped his pen on the first folder. Layer 1. Protect everything you can before he makes another move. That means assets, accounts, titles, passwords. You start reclaiming what's yours before Thomas finalizes anything behind your back. I nodded slowly. I can do that, but he'll notice if I make sudden changes. Not if we're subtle, Elijah replied, and not if we start with the items already in your name. You would be surprised how much power you still have. Marianne, for the first time in months, hope small but bright stirred beneath my ribs. We moved on to the second folder, Layer 2 evidence. Elijah said, not emotional stories, documents, transactions, communications, patterns. These are what judges respect. He handed me a printed spreadsheet filled with codes and dollar amounts. I contacted your old accountant, Arthur. He still remembers you helping with the early books. He agreed to quietly review Thomas's business transactions for the last 18 years. My eyes widened. 18 years, yes. That's how far back the irregular payments go. He showed me highlighted transfers from Thomas's corporate account, monthly deposits marked as consultations, vendor support, and contract labor, all sent to Evelyn or her oldest child. The amounts varied, but the pattern was unmistakable. He didn't just cheat on you emotionally, Elijah said. He used marital assets to support another household. That's financial betrayal, and the law sees it clearly. I stared at the documents, feeling a slow rising anger that no longer frightened me. It energized me. Elijah handed me another folder, darker and thicker than the rest. "This," he said, "is where we start preparing for the confrontation. You won't use any of it yet, but when the moment comes, this will be your armor." I opened it slowly. Inside were templates for affidavits, lists of admissible evidence types, instructions on preserving metadata, and a step-by-step guide for documenting emotional and financial abuse without ever raising suspicion. "Elijah," I whispered, overwhelmed. I never thought I would need something like this in my lifetime. He gave a gentle laugh. "Most good women don't. But the world isn't always kind to good women." We reviewed the plan carefully. My role was simple but precise. Live normally, act unchanged, observe everything. If Thomas asked questions, I would smile. If Evelyn called the house, I would not react. If the children visited the office again, I would record times and dates discreetly. "You're not spying," Elijah said. "You're protecting yourself." I exhaled slowly. "I understand." Next. We worked through my financial documents, every account, every shared card, every insurance policy I had overlooked for years. Elijah circled numbers, made notes, drew arrows showing how to regain control. "You'll start by separating your checking account," he said. "Then we secure the deed to your mother's land. After that, we freeze anything he might access without your consent." I bit my lip. "He's going to notice something." "Eventually," Elijah agreed. "But by then, it won't matter." Just as we finished the list, he reached into his briefcase and set a small wooden box in front of me. "This is yours now," he said. "A second box, the counterpart to the one he tried to hide from you. Fill it with the truth emails, statements, recordings, pictures, and keep it somewhere he'll never think to look." I ran my fingers across the lid. A surge of quiet determination warmed my chest. "So this will be the box I open when the time is right." Elijah nodded. "Yes, and it will change everything." Over the next week, Elijah guided me through the most delicate phase of our plan, discreetly shifting what I could back under my control. We met every evening in his study, papers spread across the table like a battlefield map. "Start with the accounts in your name," he instructed. "Move quietly. Small transfers. Spaced out. Nothing sudden enough to alert Thomas." I followed each step with the precision of someone knitting her own lifeline. At the bank, I smiled politely, pretending everything was routine. At home, I updated passwords while Thomas showered, my hands steady even when my heart wasn't. In the attic, I found old deeds and tax records Elijah said could become crucial later. With every document secured, every signature collected, I felt less like a victim and more like a woman reclaiming the space she once held. One evening, as we were reviewing property records, Elijah paused, tapping a page gently. "Here," he said. "This rental property, it's legally yours, not his." I blinked. "Mine?" "Yes. Bought with your inheritance." He registered it under marital assets, but the original deed proves otherwise. A spark of long-lost confidence flickered inside me. "Then that stays in my name." Elijah nodded. "Exactly." We continued sorting until the table was covered with piles labeled "Safe," "Needs Action," and "Red Flag." The red flags, unsurprisingly, were the largest stack, transfers that made no sense, withdrawals disguised as business expenses, payments to Evelyn's oldest child marked under consultations. "Elijah," I whispered. "He really used our company like this," he sighed. "Yes. Marianne, and the courts don't take kindly to misappropriation of marital or corporate funds. That night, after leaving Elijah's house, I parked a block away and stared at my home, the place where I had cooked, loved, forgiven. The lights were on. Thomas was inside, living his second life beneath my roof. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "I won't let you erase me," I murmured into the dark. Not anymore. And for the first time in years, I believed it. 2 weeks into our work, Elijah asked me to bring every document Thomas kept in his study, anything locked, hidden, or marked private. I waited until Thomas left for a weekend conference, then entered his office with gloves and a steady breath. I opened drawers he thought I never noticed, retrieved envelopes taped beneath shelves, and gathered folders labeled with numbers instead of names. When I arrived at Elijah's, he sorted through them with meticulous care. After an hour, he opened a thin manila folder and frowned. "Marianne, come look at this." I leaned closer. Inside were evaluation forms, notes from a private doctor I had never met, and a half-completed petition addressed to the county court. My blood ran cold. What is all this? Elijah's jaw tightened. "These are preparations for a mental competency claim. He's been building a case that you're showing signs of cognitive decline." I shook my head in disbelief. "But that's absurd. I manage everything in the house. I handle the bills. He doesn't need real proof," Elijah interrupted gently. "He just needs enough fabricated concern to convince a judge to place you under supervised care." My voice cracked. "A nursing home?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Yes. And once you're there, he gains full authority over your assets." I felt a deep, shuddering breath leave my body. "So that's why the will said I'd only receive an allowance if I lived in a facility." He placed his hand over mine. "Marianne, this is twist 2. He wasn't just replacing you emotionally. He was planning to dispose of you legally." A sharp, icy clarity filled me, terrifying and empowering at the same time. "Elijah," I whispered, "we finished the box. Every document, every transfer, every recording. When the moment comes, I want no doubt about who he really is." He nodded with a grim, proud smile. "Then let's build your truth, piece by piece. And when you open that box in public, Marianne, it will end him." I held the folder close, feeling its edges cut lightly into my palms. For once, the pain felt like strength. The night of the anniversary felt wrong from the moment I stepped out of the car. The hotel lights were too bright, the smiles too rehearsed, as if everyone had been given a script I hadn't read. I smoothed the front of my ivory dress and walked in alone. The box tucked carefully into my handbag, its corners pressing into my hip like a quiet reminder. Inside, the ballroom was already full. Laughter floated above clinking glasses, the kind of easy, confident laughter that belongs to people who believe the world is on their side. I recognized colleagues of Thomas's, relatives who hadn't bothered to call me in years, neighbors who never saw me except when I watered the garden. Tonight, they hugged him as if he were the hero of some long, noble story. "Marianne, you look lovely," one of his cousins said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Her eyes, however, flicked briefly to my hands, as if checking whether I still wore my wedding ring. When she saw it glinting under the chandeliers, her smile tightened. "Thank you," I replied. "It's a big night, isn't it?" She hesitated. "Oh, you have no idea." She drifted away before I could ask what she meant. I watched her move toward a table near the stage, where Thomas stood surrounded by a cluster of people, laughing too loudly, gesturing as if he were already delivering a speech. Evelyn wasn't at his side yet, but I could feel her presence in the room like perfume, sweet and cloying, waiting to be noticed. I took my seat in the front row, where my name was neatly written on a little white card, Marianne Hayes, wife. The word looked suddenly fragile, as if it could be erased with one careless stroke of a pen. I ran my thumb across it, pressing down as if I could keep it there a little longer. The room dimmed as the musicians shifted to a softer piece. A projector flickered to life, showing old photos of Thomas and me, our wedding day, the first office we rented, the worn-out car we used to share. People murmured. some genuinely touched, others politely entertained. I saw myself on the screen, younger, hopeful, eyes fixed on the man who now stood by the bar checking his watch. Such a beautiful journey. Someone behind me sighed. Yes. Another voice replied. Pity it didn't last. My shoulders stiffened. I turned slightly, but the speakers were already walking away, carrying their champagne flutes and their quiet judgments with them. The master of ceremonies took the microphone, his voice booming across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats, we're about to begin the formal program in honor of 40 years of marriage, partnership, and success. 40 years, I repeated silently. How many of those years had actually belonged to me? Thomas finally walked toward the stage, straightening his tie, flashing the practiced grin he used for investors and cameras as he passed by my row. His hand brushed my shoulder, a touch so light it could have been accidental. He didn't look down at me. He didn't say my name. He just kept walking. I watched him mount the steps, take the microphone, and turn to face the crowd. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began, his voice smooth and strong. This evening is about truth, about acknowledging the reality of our lives after so many years. A murmur of interest rolled through the room. I felt the first true wave of unease rise in my chest. For a long time, Thomas continued, I have worn a mask for the sake of appearances. I maintained a marriage that no longer reflected my heart or my responsibilities. Tonight, I intend to correct that. Someone in the back laughed nervously. The master of ceremonies shifted in place, unsure whether this was part of the script. I gripped the edge of my chair. What are you doing? Thomas, I whispered under my breath. He didn't need to hear me. His path had been chosen long before tonight. He raised his free hand toward the side entrance. I'd like to invite some very important people to join me. That was when the doors opened, and Evelyn stepped in, wearing a dress the color of deep red wine, her arm threaded through that of a tall young man. Two other adults followed a woman with Thomas's sharp jawline and a younger man whose eyes held the same pale blue as his. The room shifted, breaths catching, glasses lowering midair. I felt my heart pounding in my ears, not because I didn't know who they were, but because now everyone else would. Thomas smiled, broad and confident. My partner, Evelyn Hart, he announced, and our 3 children, Daniel, Clara, and Lucas. The names landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples through the ballroom. I watched faces turn, watched curiosity harden into scandal, amusement, and something else calculated alignment. People were already deciding which side of the story to stand on. I sat perfectly still in the front row, my hands folded over my handbag, feeling the solid shape of the box beneath the fabric. Let them finish, I told myself. Let them speak first. Around me, chairs scraped, people leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. I straightened my back and fixed my eyes on the stage, steadily. Evelyn stepped gracefully onto the stage as if she belonged there, her smile soft and victorious, the kind worn by women who believe the world has finally delivered what they were owed. Daniel stood behind her, shoulders squared, his expression brimming with a confidence too polished for someone so young. Clara adjusted the microphone as if she had rehearsed this moment, while Lucas scanned the room, daring anyone to question their presence. I could feel whispers stirring like wind catching dry leaves. A few guests leaned toward one another, fanning themselves even though the room was cool. Others covered their mouths with trembling fingers, savoring the scandal the way some savor dessert. Thomas didn't wait for the noise to settle. For years, he declared, I have kept my personal life private, even from those closest to me. But that ends tonight. This, he gestured toward Evelyn, is the woman who has supported me, loved me, and stood by my side when I needed it most. Someone gasped. Another person muttered, My God, he's saying it out loud. Thomas continued, his voice swelling with pride. And these are our children, my children. They deserve to be acknowledged, respected, and given their rightful place in my legacy. A slow, icy disbelief moved through me, but I remained still. My stillness was the only thing in the room not shaking. Evelyn placed a hand on Thomas's arm. Pretending humility. "Thomas," she said sweetly, "you don't need to do this for us. We never asked for a public announcement. That was her lie. I could hear it in the way she lifted her chin. She wanted this stage. She wanted my seat. She wanted the whole room to watch her win." Thomas shook his head, performing sincerity. "Evelyn, it's time the truth came forward." He glanced toward the master of ceremonies, who reluctantly handed him a folder, one clearly prepared in advance. Thomas opened it dramatically, and paper shimmered beneath the stage lights. "These documents," he said, "outline changes I've made to my estate to reflect the reality of my family." Murmurs rippled across the ballroom like a wave. Someone behind me whispered, "He's cutting her out, isn't he?" Another sighed. "Poor woman. She looks so lost." But I wasn't lost. I was counting every word, every lie, every smug glance. They were building the stage for themselves. They had no idea I was building something much larger beneath it. Clara stepped forward, her voice soft but tinged with arrogance. "I know this might be difficult," she said, looking directly at me, "but we are not here to hurt anyone. We just want our father to be honest," Lucas added. "We've lived in the shadows long enough." Daniel finished. "It's time people know who really matters to him." A few people clapped politely. Others smiled at them with sympathy, as if embracing the underdogs of a story they had only heard one side of. I lifted my chin, letting the weight of their words roll over me without sinking. They thought they were unveiling a truth, but what they didn't know was that truth can turn to ash if placed beside the right evidence. Thomas then looked directly at me for the first time that night. His eyes were cold, almost triumphant. "Marianne," he said, "I'm sure this is uncomfortable, but I hope, for once, you can accept the reality of what our marriage became." A sharp, mocking chuckle spread through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She should step down gracefully." I met Thomas's gaze calmly. "I'm listening," I replied. My voice didn't waver. It was the quietest sentence in the room, but it was the only one that made him blink. Evelyn spoke next, her tone syrupy with false pity. "We're not trying to take anything from you," she lied. "We just want what is fair for our family." Fair. The word tasted metallic in my mouth. Thomas held up the final page of his document packet, and to ensure fairness, "I'll be filing for divorce and reallocating joint assets accordingly." The room erupted. Gasps, shock, then applause from those who loved drama more than decency. A voice behind me hissed, "She's too old for him anyway." Another, "She should have seen this coming." Thomas lifted his hand for silence. "After tonight, everything will be handled legally, with dignity. Dignity. Coming from him." I nearly laughed. Instead, I rose slowly from my chair. Every eye followed me, every whisper quieted. Every breath in the room seemed to wait. The master of ceremonies stepped aside instinctively as I approached the stage. Thomas frowned. "Marianne," he said quietly, "this isn't necessary." Evelyn whispered to him, "Don't let her embarrass herself." Daniel smirked. Clara crossed her arms. Lucas rolled his eyes. I stepped onto the platform, the lights warming my shoulders as I reached for the microphone. "Thank you," I said softly, "for giving me the chance to speak." A few people chuckled, expecting apologies. Tears, pleas. But I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I simply opened my handbag and placed the box, my box, on the podium. The sound it made small, wooden, decisive, echoed like the beginning of a verdict. And the room fell silent. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Even Thomas seemed momentarily unsure, as if the simple act of me placing that box onto the podium broke a rule he had written for all of us. I rested my fingertips on the lid, feeling the grain of the wood beneath them. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until the room shifted from curiosity to apprehension. Then I spoke. For 40 years, I began. I have been many things: a wife, a mother, a caretaker, a partner. And tonight, I am something new. I am the woman who finally decided to stop being silent. A ripple moved across the ballroom, uneasy, restless. Thomas stepped forward, hand half raised. Marianne, I think we've had enough drama for tonight. Please just go sit down. I looked at him, and for the first time, I truly saw him not the man I married, but the man who stood before me now polished, proud and terrified. No, I said gently. You've spoken long enough. Evelyn laughed lightly, clearly trying to dismiss me. Marianne, dear, let's not make this worse. Everyone understands emotions can run high. Please don't call me dear, I interrupted softly. You haven't earned that. Gasps fluttered through the audience like startled birds. Evelyn's smile fractured. I opened the box. Inside, I removed the first folder thick, bound with a rubber band. I held it up so the nearest tables could see. This, I said, is 18 years' worth of wire transfers from Thomas's corporate account, payments disguised as consulting fees, vendor support, and miscellaneous services. I opened it, letting the pages fan outward. A few people craned their necks, others instinctively leaned away as if the truth might stain them. I continued. These transfers went to Evelyn Hart and her 3 children long before any of you knew they existed. Daniel scoffed. That's a lie. Dad helped us privately because he wasn't allowed to live his truth. I didn't even look at him. Your father used marital money, corporate money, money that belonged to both of us to build a life with your mother, a life he never offered me. Clara snapped. Maybe he didn't because you made the marriage miserable, Thomas hissed at her. Clara, stop talking. His voice cracked, not from anger, but fear. I set the first folder aside and lifted the next. These, I said, are the property deeds Thomas transferred into shell companies over the past 4 years. Companies managed, coincidentally, by Evelyn's relatives. Evelyn's face drained of color. You don't understand. Oh, I understand, I replied. Better than you think. I laid out the paperwork on the podium. The more I revealed, the quieter the room grew. The master of ceremonies shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped behind his back as if hoping to fade into the curtains. Next, I pulled out a slim blue binder. And this is the original draft of the revised will Thomas planned to finalize this month. Thomas exhaled sharply. This has gone far enough, has it? I asked. Because according to this document, once I was placed in a supervised care facility, nearly everything we built together would go to Evelyn and her children. A collective gasp filled the room. Lucas muttered, Dad wouldn't do that. You're twisting things. I met his eyes. I pressed a small button on the podium, and a recording crackled to life. Thomas's voice filled the ballroom steady, deliberate, unmistakable. She's showing signs of decline. If I can get 2 evaluations, the court will approve supervised care, then we can move forward with reallocating assets. Another voice Evelyn's answered. Silky and cold. Good. Once she's tucked away, we can finally live properly. Someone covered their mouth. Someone else whispered, Oh my God. Thomas lunged toward me, but 2 guests instinctively stepped between us, not out of loyalty to me, but because the recording made him dangerous. That's taken out of context, he shouted. You don't know what stop, I said softly. Please, don't embarrass yourself further. He froze. I reached into the box one last time and lifted a small envelope. It looked unimportant, harmless even. But when I opened it, I pulled out the original deed to the company we founded 40 years ago, the same company he now used as his personal treasury. This, I said, holding it up, was purchased with money from my parents' estate, my inheritance. The initial capital was mine entirely. The deed was placed in your name temporarily for tax reasons. Temporarily. I turned the document so everyone could see the faded signature of my father, and it was never legally transferred back. Shock rippled across the room like heat lightning. Twist 3 was unfolding. Thomas staggered backward, his face chalk white. No, that's not possible. It is, I whispered, and you knew it. which is why you needed me declared incompetent, why you needed me removed quietly." Evelyn's lips trembled. Daniel's bravado drained. Clara looked ill. Lucas shook his head repeatedly, as though denial might undo the truth. The audience, moments earlier hungry for gossip, now stared at Thomas with a horror usually reserved for criminals, and for the first time that night, Thomas couldn't speak. He simply sank into the nearest chair, clutching his head with both hands. The man who entered this ballroom to humiliate me was now the one unable to stand. The ballroom, once buzzing with whispers and anticipation, had gone silent, eerily silent. All eyes were fixed on Thomas, who sat crumpled in the chair like a statue collapsing under its own weight. The confident man who had strutted across the stage minutes ago now looked small, almost unrecognizable. The papers in my hand rustled softly as I laid the deed onto the podium, letting the truth settle over the room. Evelyn stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden stage. "Thomas," she hissed under her breath, forgetting the microphone was still on. "Tell them she's lying. Say something." He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes darted across the floor as though searching for an escape hatch. Daniel's voice cracked through the tension. "Dad, is that real? Did you know about this?" Thomas swallowed, his voice barely audible. I didn't think it mattered anymore." "Didn't matter," Clara snapped, her composure evaporating. "You built everything on her inheritance. You said it was your success, your hard work." Lucas cursed under his breath. "This is a nightmare." Evelyn rounded on Thomas, her face contorting. "You told me everything was secured. You told me the assets were already shifted, Evelyn," he whispered. "Please stop." "No," she shouted. "You promised us a future." Her voice echoed painfully in the room, bouncing off chandeliers and polished marble. I took a step closer to the microphone, my tone calm, almost gentle. "This wasn't just infidelity," I said. "This was fraud, deceit, abuse of trust, abuse of marital assets." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the audience. He didn't just betray me. He betrayed every person who believed in him. A woman in the front row whispered loudly, "This is worse than anything I've ever seen." Her husband nodded. "He's finished. Completely finished." I turned back to the box. There was one last item inside a small digital recorder. I placed it delicately beside the stack of exposed documents. "This," I said softly, "is the conversation Thomas had with his attorney 2 weeks ago." I pressed play. Thomas's voice filled the ballroom again, this time colder, more calculated than before. "Once the court deems her incompetent, the assets will default to me. After that, they can be redirected to Evelyn and the kids without legal challenges. Just get me the evaluations. I'll handle the rest." My stomach clenched hearing it again, but I kept my face steady. Elijah stepped forward from the audience, giving me a small, respectful nod. He had been waiting for this moment too. Across the room, Evelyn staggered backward as if struck. "You said you loved me." She spat. "You said you needed me." Thomas finally rose to his feet, voice cracking. I did it for us. I just needed more time." "No," I said quietly. "You did it for yourself. And for control. Everything you ever wanted was about control." Daniel threw his hands up. "We should leave. This is humiliating." But they couldn't leave. Not yet. The guests had formed a wall of bodies near the exits unintentionally, but symbolically enough, people weren't ready to let the spectacle end. Thomas, trembling now, addressed me directly. "Marianne, please, can we talk privately? We can fix this." I stared at him, feeling decades of sorrow, sacrifice, and silence press against my ribs, and for the first time, none of it crushed me. "There is nothing to fix," I replied. "Not anymore." The lights caught the silver strands in my hair, and for a fleeting second, I saw myself reflected in the polished glass behind the stage, not as a woman who had been replaced, but as a woman who had survived, a woman who had risen. Someone in the crowd began clapping, slowly at first, hesitant, then another joined, and another, within seconds. The ballroom erupted not in applause for a show, but for justice, for truth, for the quiet strength that had finally stood its ground. Evelyn's face twisted with humiliation. Clara turned away, covering her eyes. Lucas walked off the stage, shaking his head. Daniel muttered curses under his breath as he followed. Their exit was not triumphant. It was a retreat. As for Thomas, he sank back into the chair, his shoulders drooping. The applause no longer sounded like condemnation. It sounded like closure. I picked up the box, closed the lid gently, and held it against my heart. Then I leaned toward the microphone one last time. "Thank you," I said softly. For listening, I stepped down from the stage. No one stopped me. No one pitied me. They looked at me with something I hadn't felt in years, respect. Behind me, Thomas whispered my name, broken and small, but I didn't turn around. The woman he once underestimated had already walked away while his perfect little family crumbled behind him like sand slipping through desperate hands. And the days following the anniversary, news of the confrontation spread faster than I could have imagined. I didn't post anything, didn't defend myself online, didn't even leave the house except to meet with Elijah. But somehow the truth traveled through the community like wildfire by Monday morning. The board of Thomas's company had already called an emergency meeting, and by Tuesday, federal auditors were standing in the lobby with briefcases and clipped expressions, asking for access to the company's books. I watched the events unfold not with triumph, but with a quiet, almost surreal sense of inevitability. Elijah called me early that morning. "Marianne, the investigation has begun," he said. I sat on the edge of my bed, the sunlight spilling across the floor in gentle streaks. I thought I'd feel different. I admitted, "How do you feel?" Like something heavy has finally stopped pressing on my chest. I whispered, but also like there's a bruise I'll need months to heal. Elijah paused, his voice warm. "That's normal. Justice doesn't erase pain. It gives it purpose." By noon, one of Thomas's longtime colleagues, Harold, a man I'd known since the early days of the company, knocked on my door. He removed his hat when I opened it, eyes filled with a sorrow I hadn't expected. "Marianne," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I should have seen what he was doing." I shook my head gently. "Harold, none of this was your responsibility." He sighed. "They're looking through everything. Payroll, vendor accounts, even archived receipts. It's bad. Marianne, worse than we thought. Worse than we thought." Those words settled into my bones. After he left, I made tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the wind tug at the branches of the old oak tree in the yard. For the first time in years, the house felt both empty and calm. Not lonely, just mine. A space that no longer demanded I shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. By the end of the week, Thomas had been suspended from the company pending the outcome of the investigation. I heard the phrase repeated on a local radio station, the broadcaster's voice unable to hide his astonishment. "Sources claim financial irregularities may span nearly 20 years, he said. I stirred my tea slowly. 20 years, nearly half our marriage. The next blow came 2 days later. A court order froze several accounts linked to Thomas, accounts he had used to fund Evelyn and her children. The news reached them before it reached me. That evening, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, against my better judgment. I answered. A shrill voice burst through the speaker. "What did you do?" Evelyn demanded. "Thomas can't access any of his money. The kids can't pay their tuition, their rent, nothing. This is your revenge." My grip on the phone tightened. "Evelyn, I didn't freeze anything. The investigators did." "You ruined us," she cried. "You selfish." Spiteful. I didn't let her finish. "Evelyn," I said calmly, "for 18 years, you lived off funds that were never yours. The consequences of that are not my revenge. They're the truth catching up." There was silence, jagged and breathless. Then she hung up, for the first time. I didn't shake after an argument. I breathed. When I told Elijah about the call the next morning, he sighed in that steady way of his. People who've benefited from wrongdoing always call justice cruelty. Later that afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag and drove to a little house I had quietly purchased with Elijah's guidance, a modest, sunlit place on the edge of town. It had no memories of Thomas, no shadows of arguments, no lingering scent of betrayal, just warm wooden floors, freshly painted walls, and a tiny backyard where lavender already bloomed. Standing in the doorway, I whispered to myself, "This is mine." 3 words, simple, anchoring, freeing. I spent the first night on a mattress on the floor, curled under a new blanket, listening to the distant hum of passing cars. My body sank into the quiet. My mind finally loosened its grip on fear. The next morning, I woke to sunlight touching my face. I made coffee in a kitchen that held no ghosts, then opened my laptop to find an email from a local women's organization. Months ago, I had quietly contacted them about volunteering. Now, I felt ready. "Marianne," the coordinator wrote, "we'd love to have you share your experience. Women in financial abuse situations need voices like yours." I inhaled deeply, feeling both the sadness of the past and the promise of the future intertwine inside me. "Yes," I whispered to myself, "it's time." Moving into the small house felt like shedding an old, heavy skin, one I had worn for so long I forgot it never truly fit. In the first few days, I cleaned each room with slow, deliberate movements, letting myself reclaim the rhythm of solitude. I hung new curtains, watered the lavender in the backyard, and opened every window to let the air carry away the remnants of the life I had left behind. But the world outside wasn't quiet. By the end of the first week, the investigation into Thomas had expanded. Elijah kept me updated with measured but unmistakable concern. They found more accounts. He told me over the phone one evening, international transfers, shell companies, and falsified documents. I set my mug onto the counter, the ceramic clinking softly. "So it's worse than we thought," Elijah exhaled. "Much worse. Enough that the board is preparing to remove him permanently. They don't want the company associated with fraud." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Finally," I said, "I don't feel happy about this." "Elijah, I don't know what I feel," he replied gently. "Relief and grief often arrive holding hands. Let them." I took his words with me into the next day, carrying them like a stone made smooth by time. That afternoon, I visited the women's organization in town. The building was small but full of quiet activity, women sitting in circles, sharing stories, volunteers sorting donated clothes, a soft murmur of healing drifting through the halls. A staff member named Gloria greeted me warmly. "You must be Marianne," she said, offering her hand. "We've heard wonderful things about your willingness to help." I smiled, a little shy. "I'm not sure how much I can offer." "Experience," she said simply, "and survival. That's more than enough." She led me into a room where a small group was setting up chairs. "We hold workshops every Friday," she explained. "Financial independence, legal literacy, confidence building, things many women never get taught." I nodded. "I learned mine the hard way." Gloria's eyes softened. "Most of us did. Later." As I sat in on a session, listening to women speak of accounts secretly drained by husbands, inheritance stolen by siblings, properties transferred without consent, something deep inside me twisted not with anger, but with recognition. I wasn't alone. My story wasn't isolated. It was a thread in a much larger tapestry of women who had been quietly betrayed, quietly erased, quietly expected to endure. When I returned home that evening, a storm was rolling in. Thunder echoed softly in the distance, and I stood by the window watching the sky darken. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. "Daniel, you're destroying our lives. Is that what you wanted?" My fingers tightened around the phone. I typed slowly, deliberately. "Me. The investigators are doing their job. I didn't create the truth. I only revealed it." A moment later, another message came. "Daniel, Mom is falling apart. We can't pay anything. You think you're the victim? You ruined everything." I felt a brief sting, an old instinct to defend myself, but it faded quickly. I typed one last reply, me. "Your father made choices, and choices have consequences." I blocked the number before he could respond, standing alone in the quiet of my new kitchen. I let the storm outside mirror the last remains of turmoil inside me. Each rumble of thunder felt like another piece of my old life cracking away, making room for something steadier. Later that night, Elijah called again. They issued a temporary restraining order. He said, "Thomas is barred from accessing the company office until the investigation concludes." And Marianne, he reached out to the board asking for a meeting. They refused. I leaned back against the headboard of my bed. "He's losing everything, isn't he?" There was a pause. "Yes," Elijah answered softly. "Everything he tried to steal from you is slipping through his fingers." I closed my eyes. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was tangled with something heavier, a mourning for the man I once believed he was. "Elijah," I said, "will this ever stop hurting?" His answer came as warm and steady as always. "It won't always hurt, but you will remember. And remembering isn't pain, it's wisdom." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Wisdom. I could live with that. A week after the storm of accusations, freezing orders, and audits, the world around me seemed strangely still, like the pause between tides. The lavender in my backyard had begun to bloom fuller, and each morning I stepped outside to breathe in the scent, grounding myself in the small, quiet victories of simply existing in a space that was mine. But outside my little sanctuary, Thomas's life continued unraveling. On Wednesday afternoon, Gloria from the Women's Center called. "Marianne, turn on Channel 7, she urged. I did. And there he was, Thomas standing outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. Microphones were shoved toward him, voices overlapping. "Mr. Hayes, is it true investigators found inconsistencies in over 20 financial statements, Mr. Hayes? Did you misappropriate corporate funds for personal use? Is it true your wife, your legal wife, uncovered evidence leading to this investigation?" Thomas's voice cracked as he answered. No comment. I watched him struggle to push through the crowd, Evelyn trailing behind him, mascara streaking her cheeks, her composure completely shattered. Daniel shoved a camera away, yelling, "Leave us alone," while Clara tried to shield her mother. Lucas just walked rigidly beside them, jaw clenched, refusing to look at anyone. A strange ache pulsed through me, not pity, but something close to the final echo of sadness. A goodbye to the life I once thought I had. The news anchor spoke over the footage. Sources confirm a civil lawsuit has been filed against Thomas Hayes on grounds of financial misconduct and fiduciary breach. His position on the board remains suspended. I turned off the television. The silence afterward was almost soft. Later that day, I visited the Women's Center again. They were hosting a workshop about recognizing signs of financial abuse. I sat quietly in the back, listening. A woman across the room raised her hand and said through trembling lips, "He told me I didn't need to know about our accounts, that he would handle everything. I thought that was normal." Another woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Mine too. He said I wasn't smart enough with numbers. Their voices cracked something open inside me, something old, something long buried. When the facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share advice from personal experience, I hesitated before lifting my hand. "Know your worth," I said softly, "even if the person beside you spends years convincing you it's small." Eyes turned toward me, some curious, some teary, some full of recognition. I continued, "Silence doesn't protect you. Trust doesn't replace knowledge. And love should never require you to disappear." After the workshop, a woman approached me in the hallway. "I'm leaving my husband next month." She whispered, "What you said helped me feel less stupid." "You aren't stupid," I replied. "You're brave." She nodded, and for the first time that day, I felt something inside me settle into place that evening, as I made dinner for one. My phone buzzed again. I expected more unknown numbers, more demands, more noise from the wreckage of Thomas's choices. But the message was from a familiar name. Harold. He's losing control fast. The board is calling for a full removal vote this Friday. I thought you should know. I typed a simple reply. Me. Thank you for telling me. A few minutes later, he wrote back. Harold. You didn't deserve any of this. Marianne. I hope you know that now. I paused before responding, looking around at my quiet kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the warm lamplight pooling across the counter. Me. I'm learning. The next morning, Elijah stopped by unannounced. He carried a thick envelope and set it gently on my dining table. What's that? I asked. Updates, he said, and some good news. He opened the envelope and slid out several documents. The investigators traced over $200,000 in misappropriated funds. Because the assets were marital, you have legal grounds for restitution. And because the initial capital came from your inheritance, well, let's just say the law is on your side. I sank into a chair, heart pounding. Elijah, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He gave a small smile. Just breathe and keep moving forward. As he left, he paused in the doorway. Marianne. Yes, you're doing beautifully. After he drove away, I stepped outside. The air smelled like rain. The sky was pale and open. And for the first time, I let myself imagine a future not defined by betrayal or endurance, but by choice, by me. Friday arrived with an odd mixture of calm and tension. I woke early, brewed coffee, and sat on the porch of my little house, wrapped in a sweater, watching sunlight settle across the lavender. I knew the board vote was happening that morning. Elijah had offered to call me the moment it was over, but I told him not to rush. Whatever the outcome, I wasn't bracing myself for impact anymore. I had already survived the worst. Still, when my phone buzzed at 10:17 a.m., my breath caught. Marianne, Elijah said. It's done. I closed my eyes. Removed unanimously. They've stripped him of his position. They're pursuing civil charges. And they want to meet with you regarding restitution for your contributions. I let out a long, shaky exhale. It's strange. Elijah, I thought victory would feel louder. It rarely does. He replied gently, Quiet victories are the ones you earned with your whole soul. Later that afternoon, I drove past Thomas's old company, not intentionally, but the route from the grocery store curved around the business district. Reporters were still camped outside. I saw Thomas escorted through the glass doors by security, his shoulders slumped, his suit wrinkled, his face pale. Evelyn trailed behind, sunglasses hiding swollen eyes. Daniel followed angrily, pushing cameras away, while Clara and Lucas kept their heads down. For a long moment, I watched them from my car. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt release. Like exhaling after holding my breath for far too long. I drove away before any of them noticed me. That evening, I received an email from the Women's Center inviting me to co-lead a new support group focused on financial independence for older women. Gloria added a note at the end, You have a gift for making others feel seen. Let us know if you're ready. I stared at the message for several minutes, touched in a way I hadn't expected. I typed back, I'm ready. The following week came with more unraveling. Evelyn and her children moved out of the upscale townhouse Thomas had secretly financed. The landlord contacted me through Elijah. Apparently my name had been listed as an emergency contact years ago, when he learned the truth about who had been paying the rent. He told Elijah, I hope she gets every penny back. Social media circled the story like vultures. I ignored most of it. But one evening, out of curiosity, I skimmed a few posts. Some blamed Thomas, some pitied Evelyn, some called the situation karma, but none of those voices mattered to me. I was done living under the weight of other people's narratives. One night, around 9 p.m., I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something nudged me. When I picked up, it was Thomas. His voice was hoarse. Marianne. He whispered, "Please, can we talk?" I steadied myself. "About what I don't know where to go. I don't know who to trust. Everything is falling apart." His breath hitched, like he might cry. "I need help. Please, just talk to me." For a moment, an old version of me stirred the woman who once believed she could fix everything with kindness. But I wasn't her anymore. "Thomas," I said softly, "you made choices, and each one led you here." "I was wrong," he said, desperation leaking through every syllable. "I know that now. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did." "No," I replied. "You shouldn't have." Silence stretched between us. "Is there any chance," he began, "any chance you could forgive me?" My eyes drifted to the lavender swaying in the night breeze outside my window. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't the point. Freedom was, "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but I won't go back to who I was. And forgiveness doesn't mean I forget or undo the damage." He inhaled sharply. "So that's it, yes." I answered, "That's it." He didn't reply. Eventually, the call disconnected. I sat there for a long while, not shaking, not crying, just breathing. The next morning, I attended my first volunteer session at the Women's Center. I sat in a circle with women of all ages, some trembling, some angry, some exhausted in ways words couldn't express. When it was my turn to introduce myself, I simply said, "My name is Marianne. I lost 40 years, but I found myself." A few women nodded. One wiped a tear. And in that quiet room filled with broken hearts learning to beat again, I felt something warm spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. Hope, not the fragile kind that depends on someone else's choices, but the kind that grows from your own. Starting over at 62 was not something I ever imagined. For most of my life, I believed beginnings belonged to the young, to those with endless time stretching before them like an unwritten map. But in the months after everything fell apart, I learned that beginnings also belong to those who survived, to those who walked through fire, stumbled out the other side, and still found breath in their lungs. My mornings became quieter, slower, not the suffocating quiet of an unhappy marriage, but the intentional quiet of someone rediscovering the sound of her own heartbeat. I woke to sunlight spilling across my small bedroom, to the gentle rustling of lavender just outside the window. No slammed doors, no footsteps pacing the hallway, no tension lingering like smoke. Just me, one Saturday, while drinking coffee on the porch. I saw a for sale sign posted outside a small shop 2 blocks from my house. The building had peeling white paint and a faded striped awning, but something about it tugged at me. I walked over, cup still in hand, and peered through the dusty window. It used to be a flower shop. Buckets, shelves, hooks, everything inside whispered of forgotten colors and old stories. And suddenly, something inside me said, "This could be yours." The following Monday, I contacted the owner. Her name was June, a kind woman in her 70s who had closed the shop 2 years earlier after her husband passed away. She met me at the storefront and unlocked the door, letting in a breath of stale yet promising air. "It needs work," June admitted, brushing a layer of dust off the counter. But she was a good shop. She just lost her purpose after I did. I touched a chipped pot on a nearby shelf. "Maybe she's waiting for someone new." June smiled. "Are you thinking of buying it?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I think I am." Buying the shop wasn't a financial stretch thanks to Elijah's guidance. I had secured control of my assets, but emotionally, it felt enormous, like planting a flag on the moon, like reclaiming something I didn't know I had lost. Within 3 weeks, the shop was mine. I spent the next month restoring it. I scraped paint, scrubbed floors, polished old wooden shelves until my arms ached. Sometimes Gloria and other women from the center came to help, bringing sandwiches and encouragement. Other times, I worked alone, humming softly while the radio played songs from decades ago, songs Thomas never cared for but I had always loved. One afternoon, while painting the front door a soft sage green. I heard Elijah's familiar voice behind me. "You've missed a spot," he said. I turned to see him standing with 2 cups of lemonade. "I've missed hundreds," I laughed. "Accepting one?" He looked around the shop, nodding with approval. "It suits you." Marianne, fresh, warm, honest. "I'm still learning," I replied. "You're doing beautifully." His presence was comforting. He wasn't there to fill the empty spaces, but to remind me I no longer had to carry everything alone. As the shop neared completion, I took a trip to a nearby flower market, my first one in years. The scent hit me like a memory roses. Lilies, eucalyptus, fresh soil. I felt something tighten in my throat as I walked between rows of color. A vendor, an older man with silver hair, greeted me kindly. "You opening a shop?" he asked, noticing the notepad in my hand. "Yes," I said. "A small one." He smiled. "Then you'll need these," he said, handing me a bundle of freshly cut peonies. "On the house. For luck." I blinked back sudden warmth. "Thank you." When I returned to the shop, placing the peonies in a vase near the window, sunlight hit the petals just right, blooming in shades of blush and ivory. And for the first time, I felt my life unfolding into something soft, something mine. As weeks passed, I reconnected with people I had lost touch with. Old friends reached out women I once laughed with in my 20s. Cousins who had stepped back when Thomas stepped forward. Some apologized. Some simply wanted to reconnect. I accepted each gesture with grace one evening. My childhood friend Lila visited the shop. She stepped inside, looked around, and burst into tears. "Marianne," she cried, hugging me tightly, "you're glowing." I laughed. "I'm sweating." "No," she insisted, wiping her cheeks. "You're alive again." Her words lingered with me long after she left. The shop opened quietly on a Thursday morning. No grand announcements, no flyers, no celebration, just an open sign hanging in the window and the smell of fresh flowers drifting into the street. Customers trickled in one by one. Some were curious neighbors, others were regulars from the shop's past, delighted to see it revived. That afternoon, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "It smells like happy in here." Her mother chuckled, but I felt tears prick my eyes. Happy. The word wrapped around me like a warm shawl. At the end of the day, Elijah stopped by again. He leaned against the doorway, watching me sweep petals off the floor. "You did it," he said. I paused, leaning on the broom. "Yes." "I guess I did. Feels good. Doesn't it?" I nodded slowly. "It feels like I'm starting the part of my life I should have had all along." Elijah smiled softly. 40 years wasn't wasted, Marianne. They shaped the woman who built this. They led you to this moment. I breathed in the scent of flowers, dust, sunlight, and fresh beginnings. Maybe he was right. Maybe the years I lost were also the years that taught me how to rise. When the shop had been open for about a month, I settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Mornings began with unlocking the front door, flipping on the lights, and inhaling the first breath of floral air that greeted me like an old friend. I arranged bouquets the way I used to arrange my hopes, carefully, thoughtfully, believing each piece mattered. Customers came and went, sharing bits of their lives with me, trusting me with flowers meant for graduations, apologies, anniversaries, and sometimes goodbyes. Their stories filled the shop with a quiet hum of humanity. One afternoon, a man in his 70s wandered in, looking lost. "I need lilies," he said, voice rough. "My wife loved lilies. It's been a year today." I guided him gently to the display. "White or pink? Pink." He whispered. "She always said white ones looked too sad." I picked out the freshest stems and wrapped them in pale tissue. He watched my hands work. "You've got a gentle touch," he said. "My wife had hands like yours, soft but strong." I smiled softly. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say." When he left, I stood alone in the shop for a moment, letting the quietness settle into my bones. Loss, I realized, didn't always end something. Sometimes It transformed it. As weeks turned into months, life began weaving itself into a new, meaningful pattern. I found comfort in the small things, the sound of scissors trimming stems, a child giggling while choosing daisies, the late afternoon orange glow that spilled through the shop's front window and painted everything with warmth. And sometimes, Elijah would visit, never announced, never dramatic. He'd simply appear at the doorway with a cup of coffee or a bag of fresh pastries, leaning against the frame with a gentle smile. "Thought you might need this," he'd say. One evening, as I was organizing a shelf of vases, he stepped inside. "Busy day?" he asked. "Good busy," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron, the kind that feels right. He looked around the shop with a softness in his eyes I didn't see often. "You've built something beautiful." "Marianne," I shrugged lightly. "It's still small." He shook his head. "Beautiful doesn't need to be big." We shared a quiet moment, the kind that didn't require words to fill it. Then he cleared his throat and said, "By the way, the restitution negotiation is moving forward. They asked for a written summary of your contributions during the early years of the company." I hesitated. "Do they really need that?" "Isn't the documentation enough?" "It is," he said gently. "But your voice matters too. Those years weren't just paperwork. They were your life." I nodded slowly. "All right, I'll write it." He smiled. "Good. And Marianne." "You're handling all of this with grace." After he left, I sat at the counter with my notebook, tapping the pen against the page. Writing about the past felt like peeling back the final layers of old wounds, letting them breathe in the open air for the first time. I wrote about the nights I stayed up sorting receipts at the kitchen table, the weekends spent helping Thomas organize outdated filing systems, the times I reassured him when a deal fell through, the meals I packed when he worked late, the dreams I tucked away because his always took precedence. By the time I finished, my chest felt lighter, not healed, but honest. A few days later, Lila visited again, carrying a bag of scones. "For your break," she said. "You're working too hard." "I like the work," I replied. "It keeps my hands busy and my mind quiet." She sat on a stool by the counter and studied me. "I meant what I said last time, Marianne, you really are glowing. I'm rebuilding." I said softly, "You're more than rebuilding. You're becoming." Her words warmed something deep inside me. That night, after closing the shop, I walked home under the glow of streetlights. The neighborhood felt safe, familiar. When I reached my driveway, I paused to look up at the sky. Stars dotted the darkness like small reminders that even after the deepest night, there are points of light waiting to be seen. Inside, I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the breeze sway the lavender. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for footsteps, for questions, for demands. I wasn't waiting to be needed or judged or dismissed. I was simply living, soon, without realizing it. I settled into a nightly ritual. I'd open my journal and write one thing I was proud of each day. Some days it was small, I fixed the leaky faucet. Other days it was significant. I helped a woman at the center open her own bank account. And once, on a day when the sunlight had been especially golden, I wrote, "I laughed today, really laughed, on a quiet Sunday morning while arranging sunflowers in the shop. I caught my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me had lines on her face, silver in her hair, and softness in her eyes, but she also had something new, something unmistakable. Pride, not the loud, boastful kind, the quiet, rooted kind. The kind that grows from surviving what should have broken you." Later that afternoon, Elijah stopped by again, carrying a stack of legal papers. "Good news," he said. "The restitution is approved. You'll receive compensation for your contributions and damages." I exhaled, feeling a weight lift I didn't realize I still carried. "Thank you, Elijah, for everything." He smiled gently. "You did the hard part." "Marianne," I just pointed at the map. I laughed a soft, genuine sound. "Well, thank you for pointing." He hesitated before adding, "You know, you've built a whole new life in such a short time. You should be proud of that." I looked around the shop, the flowers, the sunlight, the memories not yet made. "I am," I said quietly. "I truly am." When he left, I locked the shop and stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the evening breeze brush against my skin. I thought of the 40 years behind me not as wasted, but as chapters that led me here, to a life I chose, a life I built, a life that finally felt like mine. And as I walked home, I whispered into the fading sunlight, "The next 20 years are mine to live." My voice didn't tremble. It glowed. There are evenings now when I sit on the porch of my little house, a cup of tea warming my hands, and I let my mind wander back over the path that brought me here. For a long time, I was afraid to look backward. I thought if I stared too closely at the past, it would swallow me whole, but it hasn't. When I look back now, the hurt is still there, yes, but it no longer owns me. It simply reminds me of who I used to be and how far I've come. I used to believe love meant giving everything, even the parts of myself that were not meant to be traded. I thought patience was the same as silence, and loyalty meant staying. No matter how invisible I became, I know better now. Love without respect is just dependence dressed up in pretty words. Patience without boundaries is slow self-erasure. And loyalty, when given to the wrong person, is simply a leash. If there is one thing I want every woman in her 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond to hear, it is this: do not hand anyone the map to your entire life and call it devotion. Keep a part of yourself that is yours alone, your savings, your dreams, your friendships, your name. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting safety makes you selfish. Don't let them call you crazy for asking questions. Don't let them use your age as a weapon. People will tell you to be kind, to be understanding, to forgive. Those things are good, but kindness needs a fence. Understanding needs a door that can close. Forgiveness does not require your return. You are allowed to walk away and still be a good person. Sometimes women ask me, "Is it ever too late for me?" And I always smile and say, "As long as you are still breathing, your story is not finished, and you are not a supporting character in someone else's script." I lost a marriage, a house, and the version of myself that believed I had to earn my right to exist. In return, I gained something I never thought I'd find again, myself. And now, when I say my own name, it finally feels like it belongs to me. If you've ever carried a quiet injustice like mine, remember this: you are allowed to stand up, to ask questions, to say enough. You are not selfish for wanting safety, and you are not broken for walking away. You deserve peace, and you are allowed to choose it today. Let that truth stay.